Hey, what's up everyone? Hope you're having an awesome day. Welcome back to Infinite Omega, with me, Black Deatha. Today we're going to be talking about something a little different. Up until now, I've covered just gaming, but I've wanted to branch out a little and also cover the occasional movie, and who knows, maybe some TV, we'll see. However, today though, I'm going to be talking about a movie I just got back from seeing. A movie I'll be seeing again tonight, in fact. A movie that's been building up to this point for over a decade now. A movie that is the culmination of 21 movies before it. A movie whose very title has been hinted at years ago.
We're the Avengers. We can bust arms dealers all the livelong day, but that up there, that's the Endgame. How are you guys planning on beating that?
Together.
We'll lose.
And we'll do that together too.
Did we just lose? Why would you do that? We're in the Endgame now.
So, just in case it was in some way not apparent by this point, or you somehow clicked the video without seeing its title, we are here to talk about Marvel's Avengers Endgame. At this point, I can still barely believe what I saw. This movie defies expectations. But before I get into it, I want to make the point. I would rather avoid any copyright claims on my channel, and as I'm still rather new to doing anything movie related, I'm being a little extra cautious. So I'm going to be using clips sparingly. Most of what you're going to see on screen will be footage from LEGO Avengers and from the rather amazing Marvel's Spider-Man on PS4. I'm trying to get this feed switched over to the game. Come on, we can do this. Ah, there we go. Much better. Well, my god, where do I even begin? This movie is quite literally 3 hours long, making it hands down the longest MCU film to date. And honestly, I was on the edge of my seat from beginning to end. It's going to be somewhat impossible to truly talk about this movie without getting into spoilers, but I'm going to try and give some spoiler-free impressions to begin with. I can say this, Endgame was amazing. It both met and defied my expectations in so many ways, and I wholeheartedly recommend it. Now, by this point, you either are or are not invested in this world and into these characters. If you're not invested already, that's okay, but I'm not sure this movie or my, or anyone's review for that matter, will change your mind on the subject, so this movie may not have the same impact on you. However, if you are invested, then this truly is a spectacle to behold, with real emotional weight behind it. Where Infinity War built up Thanos and made him arguably the most interesting, formidable, and at times sympathetic MCU villains to date, Endgame rightfully shifts the focus back to the core Avengers. This was accomplished narratively with the snap, trimming the remaining Avengers down to the original status quo, with only a couple of extra newcomers like Rocket and Nebula around to fill out the ranks. Avengers Endgame deserves to be praised on so many levels. Just like Infinity War last year, it's a massively ambitious undertaking that executes its ultimate vision beautifully. From its stellar and massive cast, one that somehow manages to cram in more characters even than were present in Infinity War, or to its writing by Christopher Marcus and Stephen McFeely, to its direction under the Russo brothers. If you haven't seen it yet, you owe it to yourself to go see it, and not be spoiled by me or anyone else. I hope you will come back and watch the rest of the video after, and tell me what you thought about it in the comments. So, at this point, spoiler warning. Like, seriously, stop watching now if you haven't seen it. This is your last chance. Leading up to its release, I tried to avoid spoilers. I did still watch the trailers, though I had also read Kevin Feige stated that all the footage used in those trailers was from the opening half an hour or so, and this mostly seems to have held true. So, if you only watched those, you could still have been safe in not knowing where they were really going with the story. We begin with the cold open to see Clint Barton, Hawkeye, at home with his family. He's teaching his daughter archery, even calling her Hawkeye as she hits a bullseye. Just following this, he sees, well, actually he manages to completely miss seeing his family get dusted from the snap. We are then shown the title, Avengers Endgame. At this point, we pick things up about 3 weeks after the end of Infinity War. Tony Stark and Nebula are aboard the Benatar, stranded in space, dead in the water. Tony bonds a little with Nebula, and then makes a recording for Pepper. Things are grim, and oxygen is near depletion. There was a lot of speculation as to how they would be saved. Some even thought maybe Pepper would show up in an Iron Man suit. However, it turned out to be none other than Captain Marvel herself, who promptly brings the Benatar back to Earth, reuniting Tony Stark and Steve Rogers on screen together for the first time since the end of Civil War. I was somewhat surprised that this plot point was tied up so quickly, just given the feelings that the trailer gave that Tony would be apart from the others for longer. But it also makes sense. This movie has an incredible amount of ground to cover yet. I did find Captain Marvel's introduction a little abrupt. It seemed a little skipped over, actually. In the end credits scene from her own movie, we saw her first appearance back on Earth, after the pager she had given Nick Fury was apparently recovered. I assumed that this scene had been part of a longer one, filmed for Endgame, that we would see expanded upon now. But it seems instead we were just left to assume that after this scene she just kinda went off to find Tony. It's a little jarring, and perhaps would have benefited from an extra scene or two to better set up her entrance, but again, this movie is already so long, so I can understand why they chose not to cover this. Tony and Steve have an uneasy reunion. Tony blames Steve for their overall loss against Thanos, and that Cap wasn't even with them so they could lose together, referencing his stance from Age of Ultron, stating that he had wanted to build a
suit of armor around the world,
and telling him that he had seen this coming in a vision. But Steve was too worried about people's personal liberties to see the bigger picture. I found this particularly interesting, because in Civil War we saw Tony questioning this stance, but Thanos' attack and victory has steeled Tony's original resolve. However, right now Tony is too weakened to do much of anything, and is out of the commission for the time being. Carol begins to leave. When asked where she is going, she says to kill Thanos. Cap argues that this is everyone's fight, and that they need to find a way to undo what Thanos did. Hoping, if they can find him and wrest control of the Infinity Gauntlet, they can revert everything to how it was before. Nebula reveals where Thanos would have gone, to the Garden, the planet where he sat in tranquility at the end of Infinity War. And so, Steve, Bruce, Thor, Natasha, Rhodey, Rocket, Nebula, and Carol all set off to hunt down Thanos. I originally assumed they might find him, fight him, lose again, and have to come up with another plan. However, here, expectations are quite subverted. They find Thanos, however now he is severely weakened. Thor quite literally disarms him. With the gauntlet now free from him, they find the stones are gone. The group is horrified to learn that Thanos has used the gauntlet to destroy the stones, to destroy the temptation to use it again. In doing so, it nearly killed him. And in this moment, in a state of hopeless fury, Thor beheads Thanos with Stormbreaker. We cut to black, and the words 5 years later slowly play across the screen. We are shown a world very much devastated from the snap. Society seems to barely function. The world has lost hope. Steve is leading a support group to try and help people move on. But it's clear many, such as Natasha, aren't able to do so. She's been trying to track down Hawkeye, who it turns out has been on a murder spree, taking out whole gangs at a time. Meanwhile, Scott Lang returns from the quantum realm, with the inadvertent assistance of a rat that walks across the control panel, finally freeing him after being trapped for 5 years since the end of Ant-Man and the Wasp. Although it turns out he did not experience the passage of time the same way as the rest of the world. For Scott, it's only been a few hours. This gives him an idea. Over the past year, I along with the rest of the fandom have speculated, read comments, and watched all sorts of videos about what might happen in Endgame. Many theories were strongly pointing to there being some degree of time travel involved. Now, I'll admit, I've always liked time travel stories in sci-fi, but the rumors did have me a little worried that using time travel to just undo Thanos' victory from Infinity War would act to retroactively cheapen that ending. But at the same time, by this point, I felt the Russos had earned the benefit of the doubt, so I was not overly worried how it would be executed. I feel this faith in them was well placed. Yes, time travel plays a big part in the story, and in a satisfying way. Ironically, what makes it work so well is they tried to have it both ways, something that if handled differently could have been disastrous. By this I mean, they did want to keep the gravity of the ending intact from Infinity War, while also using time travel to undo the snap, but without undoing the fallout from it. Scott heads off to the Avengers base to share his idea. Though not being a scientist himself, he knows they will need help. He tells Nat and Steve about the quantum realm. This leads the three of them back to Tony. We find Tony and Pepper have managed to build a life and happiness together, and they now have a little girl named Morgan. In the 5 years that have passed, the rift between Tony and Steve seems to have diminished, and he seems genuinely happy to see them. But while most characters are focused on what they lost, Tony also has something to lose in the present. It's for this reason that he refuses to help them in making time travel work. This leads them to go see Bruce Banner, who surprisingly has changed a lot since we last saw him. He is now Professor Hulk. He looks and sounds like Bruce, but is Hulk-sized and, green. Bruce explains to Scott, who is very confused about the whole situation, that he did gamma ray therapy and merged himself with the Hulk. Bruce, however, doesn't feel he can help, as time travel isn't exactly in his expertise. But Nat is able to convince him to at least try. We have some funny scenes of Bruce doing some time travel experiments with Scott, but not making any real progress. Meanwhile, Tony, seemingly out of curiosity, starts working on the problem, and he pretty much solves it immediately. Tony, just as much as anyone, is still haunted by those that were lost, including Peter Parker, and it's also implied his friend and assistant, Happy Hogan. Ultimately, it's Pepper who helps Tony come to realize he will not be able to stand by and do nothing. Tony shows up to the Avengers base, where he meets first with Steve. He makes it clear that any attempt to undo the snap must not undo what came after, that they must bring back those who were lost to the present. He also gives Steve back his shield, something Tony kept at the end of Civil War. The first thing to do is round everyone up, so Bruce along with Rocket set off to get Thor. It turns out some of the Asgardians have survived since Thanos' attack from the beginning of Infinity War. They have set up a home on Earth called New Asgard, in a little village in Tonsberg, Norway. A cool bit of trivia here, this is also the same town where Red Skull and Hydra found the Tesseract during World War II, as seen in Captain America, the first Avenger. They are greeted by Valkyrie from Ragnarok, who also survived. She tells them Thor has changed. When they find him, this is another one of Endgame's many surprises. Thor rarely leaves his home, and he now spends his days perpetually drunk, sitting around with his surviving friends Korg and Meek, playing Fortnite while threatening trolls online. Since their loss, and what Thor believes to be his own failure, he has fallen into depression. He has really let himself go and is kind of fat now. The very mention of Thanos' name causes him pain. He says he's not going anywhere. Rocket tells him they have beer on the ship. Thor realizes it's very important he board the ship. Meanwhile, Natasha has gone off in search of Clint. When she finds him, he has just taken on and wiped out another gang right in the street. She gives him hope and brings him home. With the Avengers reassembled, they begin to form a plan. They have just enough Pym particles for each of the team to make a single trip back in time, then return again. They discuss the rules of time travel, most of which Scott learned from Back to the Future.
Please, cut!
However, it's pointed out time travel, as it's seen in a long list of movies, got it wrong. And when you travel to the past, it is now your present. With the future you left behind, now your past. So to change something in the past will create a parallel alternate timeline. In order for this to work, they need to track down all 6 Infinity Stones, realizing that over the past several years, each one of them has at one point or another come into contact with at least one of the stones. For Thor, the Aether, or the Reality Stone, during the events of the Dark World, and both the Tesseract and Loki's Scepter, the Space and Mind Stones, were present during the Battle of New York during the first Avengers. They also assume since the Sanctum Sanctorum is in New York that Doctor Strange would have the Time Stone with him during the battle as well. Rocket knows where to find the Power Stone due to the Guardians' interaction with it in the first movie. This leaves the Soul Stone as the one none of them have personally encountered. Nebula, however, tells them she knows it's on Vormir. This is where Thanos left with her sister Gamora, but returned alone. With all the stones accounted for, they divide up into teams to retrieve them. Tony, Steve, Bruce, and Scott will go back to 2012 during the Battle of New York from the first Avengers. Thor and Rocket will go to 2013 to Asgard during the events of the Dark World. And finally, Clint, Nat, Rhodey, and Nebula will go back to 2014 to Morag, where the Guardians of the Galaxy starts off. The Benatar shrunk down to pocket size, with Rocket entrusting it to Clint. Cap gives a speech. The fate of half of all life in the universe rests on their success or failure. They all agree to do whatever it takes, and they enter the quantum realm together. The Earth team emerges during the Battle of New York. Bruce goes off to get the Time Stone from Doctor Strange. He attempts to enter from the roof during the chaos of the battle. It's here that he encounters the Ancient One, last seen in Doctor Strange, years before her death. She is on the roof defending against the attack. She asks Bruce why he has come. He tells her he needs to get something from Doctor Strange. Showing she is all-knowing, she doesn't even ask who. She simply says he is 5 years too early. Doctor Strange is not a sorcerer yet. She is wearing the amulet of the Eye of Agamotto, and Bruce tells her this is what he's come for. When he presses to take it, she hits him and knocks his spirit right out of his body, like we've seen her do before. Bruce, now looking like his old self, continues to explain it's needed. She counters that to protect her timeline, it needs to remain with her. However, when he reveals that it is Doctor Strange who willingly gives it to Thanos, she realizes she was wrong. Strange will be the greatest of them, and he would not give it up without a cause. She entrusts Bruce with the Time Stone, and he swears he will return it back to this exact moment when they have reversed the snap. Around this time, the battle is wrapping up, and the original Avengers are standing over a defeated Loki in Stark Tower. Tony and a miniaturized Scott are watching from the shadows. They need to get the Tesseract and the Scepter. What's really cool here is we see the events immediately following the scene in the Avengers. Loki makes fun of Captain America by appearing as him, and Thor slaps a muzzle on him. S.H.I.E.L.D. arrives with some familiar faces from the Winter Soldier, including Sitwell and Rumlow. The Tesseract and Loki are to return to Asgard with Thor, and S.H.I.E.L.D. is taking possession of the Scepter. Tony points out to Scott that most of the S.H.I.E.L.D. agents here are actually Hydra, but at this time no one knows this yet. Scott takes position on past Tony to stay with the Tesseract. Rumlow and his men have gotten on the elevator with the Scepter and are stopped at the floor below as Captain America gets on. This scene is very reminiscent of the one from the Winter Soldier. He tells them there are new orders, and he is to take possession of the Scepter. They seem to be ready to attack, but then Cap tells them it's okay. He leans into Sitwell's ear and whispers, "Hail Hydra." Next, we see Cap leaving the elevator with the Scepter, with the Hydra agents looking stunned. Down in the lobby of Stark Tower, another face from Winter Soldier appears, Nick Fury's old boss Pierce. He wants S.H.I.E.L.D. to take possession of Loki and the Tesseract. Past Tony and Thor won't give up either. Ant-Man causes a distraction by messing with Tony's arc reactor. This causes a commotion as everyone is worried over Tony, who looks to be having a heart attack. Future Tony is just about to get away with the case containing the Tesseract when a very pissed off Hulk bursts into the lobby angry that he was told to take the stairs. In the chaos, Tony is knocked down, the Tesseract flies off and lands at Loki's feet. He immediately picks it up and teleports himself away. S.H.I.E.L.D. is alerted to Loki's escape. This is just as Cap runs into his past self, who believes he must be Loki in disguise. They have a fight, and Steve manages to subdue himself with the Scepter. We cut to Thor and Rocket on Asgard, sneaking past this timeline's captured Loki. All they need to do is go and see Jane Foster, who is on Asgard with the Aether still inside her. Rocket will extract it, and they can be on their way. Off in the distance, they see her enter her chambers down the hall. But Thor is crippled by self-doubt, and he can't face her. He wants to slip down to the cellar and get drunk. Thor abandons Rocket, who ends up having to go after the Aether on his own. Thor runs into his mother. Just like the Ancient One, she sees the truth. She was raised by witches, she reminds him. She knows this is not her son from her time. But she encourages him, telling him, even though he may have failed, he can learn from it. Rocket has managed to extract the Aether, but alerted the Asgardians in the process. They need to leave. Before they do, Thor reaches out his hand and summons Mjolnir. After a moment, it comes to his hand. For Thor, this is important, knowing he is still worthy. He wishes to warn his mother of her impending doom this very day, but she won't let him tell her the future. Armed with his hammer and the Reality Stone, they jump back into the quantum realm. In 2014, the team arrives on Morag. Clint and Nat restore the Benatar to full size and set off for Vormir, leaving Nebula and Rhodey behind. Nebula warns Rhodey they need to be careful, as they are not the only ones looking for the Power Stone right now. Rhodey asks who else is after it. She replies, her father, Thanos. At this point, we cut to Thanos of 2014. Fully covered in armor and wielding a massive double-bladed sword. He is greeted by the past Gamora and Nebula. Now, the timeline here is a little confusing, because at this point, Gamora and Nebula were sent to assist Ronan the Accuser in recovering the Power Stone. So them being with Thanos right now, while maybe not impossible, seems to mess with established events a little. Either way, Nebula's cybernetic implant starts to bug out, and she projects a hologram showing memories from the future Nebula. When the future Nebula came to the past, her mind connected to the same network as her past self. Thanos orders she be brought to his ship. Back on Morag, Star-Lord arrives and is headed to recover the Power Stone. Rhodey intercepts him, knocking him out. He and Nebula recover the stone. Rhodey holds onto it, and both count down to jump back to the quantum realm. Rhodey jumps, but Nebula collapses to the ground, as Thanos has managed to immobilize her through her connection to her past self. Now captured and aboard Thanos' ship, he reviews more of her memories and learns about everything that will happen, his victory, and his death at the hands of the Avengers, as well as their plan to undo what he will accomplish. Past Nebula swears she would never betray him, and Thanos says he'll give her the chance to prove herself. She takes the place of her older self and jumps into the quantum realm using the time suit. Back on Earth in 2012, the team has a big problem. They have lost the Tesseract, and with no idea where Loki has gone with it, the mission will fail. Each of them can only make one final jump, and that is to return to the future. Tony has an idea. He remembers that at one point his father worked on the same base as Hank Pym. He knows his father was also doing work on the Tesseract at this time. He has a hunch they should be able to get both the Tesseract and more Pym particles at the same time. Tony asks Steve if he trusts him. He affirms that he does. They tell Bruce and Scott to go back. Then Tony and Steve jump further back in time to Camp Lehigh in 1970. This is a cool callback, as this is also the same camp where Steve trained before he became Captain America, as well as being seen again later as a secret Hydra facility in Winter Soldier. They infiltrate the base, with Steve posing as a soldier and Tony as a scientist. Splitting up, Tony goes after the Tesseract, managing to retrieve it just before running into his father. At this point in time, he and his father would be of a similar age. Introducing himself as Howard Potts, he gets the chance to connect with his father. They talk about family and responsibility, and before parting ways, Tony hugs him, much to his father's confusion. Meanwhile, Steve distracts Dr. Pym, getting him out of his lab. Then he slips in and grabs some Pym particles. As he moves to leave the base, he sees Peggy Carter, though she doesn't see him. With both objectives complete, Steve and Tony return to the quantum realm. We cut to Clint and Natasha having arrived on Vormir, following the same path Thanos will years later during Infinity War. They are greeted by Red Skull, who knows both their names. He tells them the price of the Soul Stone. One of them will have to sacrifice something they love. Clint hopes maybe it's a trick, or there's some other way. Nat knows that it's no trick, the price must be paid, and she is willing to pay it with her life. Clint reasons that after the murderous rampage that he's been on in the past 5 years, he doesn't deserve to live. Both fight very hard to save the other and sacrifice themselves. Just when it looks like Clint will be the one to die, Nat stops him from jumping, anchoring him in place, telling him to let her go, and she falls to her death below. With the sacrifice complete, Clint is granted the Soul Stone. In anguish, he returns to the quantum realm alone. With all the stones recovered, everyone returns to the Avengers base in 2023. Bruce asks where Natasha is. Learning of her death, everyone is distraught and angry over their loss. Knowing they need to see their mission through to the end, for Nat and everyone else they've lost, Tony, Bruce, and Rocket begin to assemble the stones onto an Iron Man gauntlet. While they are doing this, the doppelganger Nebula begins to tamper with the quantum tunnel, opening a gateway in 2014 that Thanos' ship, the Sanctuary 2, enters, then emerges in the present, rapidly expanding back to its full size as it ascends to the sky. At the same time, the Avengers are deliberating on who should wield the gauntlet. Thor practically begs to be the one, wanting so badly to do something to atone for his failure. They are worried what damage it will do to he who wields it. Bruce steps forward and volunteers he should do it. He is the strongest Avenger, and he has a better chance than any of them to survive. On top of which, it emits gamma radiation, which doesn't hurt him. When it's agreed Bruce will be the one, he is reminded to bring back everyone who is lost to right now, not 5 years ago, thus preventing the past 5 years from being rewritten. Not knowing what to expect, they lock down the room, and everyone armors up or otherwise takes cover. Bruce picks up the gauntlet. Tony's tech reforms it to fit his massive Hulk-sized arm. As soon as Bruce dons the gauntlet, a powerful surge of energy courses through him and he screams in agony. The power of the Infinity Stones looks to be immolating his arm. He fights through the pain and snaps his fingers. Everyone now wonders, did it work? Clint's phone begins to ring. His wife is calling. Realization begins to dawn on them that they have succeeded. Any possibility of celebrating this world-changing event is cut short as the entire Avengers base is utterly decimated by a barrage of hellfire raining down from the Sanctuary 2. With the base obliterated and the Avengers buried under the rubble, Thanos beams down to the surface. Nebula greets him. He tells her to retrieve the stones. He takes off his helmet and sits down to wait. Aboard the Sanctuary 2, Gamora goes to visit the older Nebula in her cell. Asking her what their relationship looks like in her time, Nebula admits she tried again and again to kill Gamora, but eventually they became sisters. She tells her Thanos sacrificed her to get the Soul Stone. Gamora, as we know, also already hated Thanos. Freeing Nebula, they sneak down to the surface together. Hawkeye, who is knocked unconscious during the Blitz, wakes up with the gauntlet nearby. Grabbing it, he sees he's about to be overrun by Outriders. He flees, only to run into past Nebula, who tries to take the gauntlet. She is stopped by the arrival of Gamora and the present-day Nebula, who is forced to kill her past self. By now, Iron Man, Cap, and Thor have emerged from the rubble and chaos. Standing in the bombed-out remains of the Avengers building, they see Thanos sitting down below. Knowing this is probably a trap, they still move to confront him. Thor reaches out both hands and calls Stormbreaker and Mjolnir. Thanos mocks them for not being able to let go and accept their fate, and vows this time he won't just kill half of all life. Thanos will wipe out all life in the universe and rebuild a new one where none will be unable to accept their fate because no one will be around from before to tell them. The three move in and attack. This fight is absolutely amazing. Probably the best superhero fight I have ever seen put to screen. Thanos fights brutally and maintains the upper hand through sheer power. He manages to knock down both Cap and Iron Man. Thor, in a very cool move, throws Mjolnir up in the air and bats it into Thanos with Stormbreaker. But soon, Thanos gets a hold of the axe, snatching it out of the air as Thor calls it to himself. In a reverse of Infinity War scene, he begins to press it into Thor's chest. The screen cuts to Mjolnir sitting in the dirt. We see it start to stir, and then lift to the air. What happens next had the audience in my theater go absolutely crazy. Mjolnir smashes into Thanos just before he can kill Thor, and it stops in the air and hurtles to the hand of Captain America. I gotta say, this part was amazing, and one of my favorite moments in the whole movie. The feeling of absolute triumph in this moment is undeniable. Some may call this fan service, but I disagree. There's fan service, and then there's payoff to something built up to. This moment was completely earned. Steve's story from the very beginning has always been about his unwavering goodness, the one who will always do what's right no matter the circumstances. If there's any human to be worthy, it would undeniably be Captain America. For a short while, he's actually able to go on the offensive, pushing Thanos back, and with Mjolnir, even summons thunder down on him. But Thanos eventually gets the upper hand and knocks the hammer from Cap's grasp. Then he rains down brutal strike after strike with his sword. All Cap can do is go on the defensive with his shield. But even the shield is soon fractured under Thanos' onslaught. With the fight nearly lost, Thanos begins to gloat. While he has always dispassionately extinguished life, it was never personal. But humanity has annoyed him, and this time he will take pleasure in destroying it. Thanos' ground forces land, pouring forth massive armies of Chitauri, the army seen in Avengers, along with the Outriders and the Black Order. Just as all hope seems to be lost, Cap hears a voice on his comm saying, "On your left." We see one of Doctor Strange's sling ring portals begin to form, joined by dozens more. With the snap undone, the fallen allies have mobilized to join the fight. Everyone is back. Doctor Strange, Spider-Man, the rest of the Guardians, Falcon, Black Panther and the Wakandans, Scarlet Witch, Valkyrie and the Asgardians, Winter Soldier, Wong and the Sorceress, Wasp, the Ravagers, and even Pepper Potts in the rescue suit Tony made her. At this point, Ant-Man, Giant Man,
Great Scott!
bursts out of the rubble, having saved Professor Hulk, War Machine, and Rocket, who were trapped underneath. The battle kicks off, with Captain America finally uttering his famous line,
Avengers! Assemble!
I won't describe it scene for scene, but every character gets a little moment to shine. During the chaos, Tony is reunited with Peter. So happy he is back, Tony hugs him. Star-Lord is also reunited with Gamora, but as she's not the same Gamora he lost, he ends up getting kicked in the nuts a couple times after reaching out to touch her cheek. Hawkeye alerts everyone over the comms he has the gauntlet. It's decided they need to return the stones to their original times right now, to forever remove them from Thanos' reach. But with the quantum tunnel destroyed, there is no way to do so. Scott points out they still have his van with the time machine in the back of it. They locate the van, Ant-Man and Wasp head off to get the quantum tunnel booted up. Thanos is alerted to the gauntlet's presence, and he and his forces go after it. Black Panther, then Spider-Man carry it for a while, trying to keep it from Thanos. Tony asks Doctor Strange if this is the one possible future of the 14 million he saw in which they would win. Strange tells him he can't say. If he does, it won't happen. Thanos comes face to face with Scarlet Witch, who partially destroys his double-bladed sword and damages his armor. Thanos calls down a barrage of fire from the Sanctuary 2, obliterating his own forces in the process. As they rain hell down on everyone below, the heroes are getting beaten down. Suddenly, the guns begin firing into the upper atmosphere. It's now that Captain Marvel makes her return and utterly destroys Thanos' ship. Joining the forces on the ground, she carries the gauntlet as well. There's a fairly cool scene where she and pretty much every single female hero stand with her, saying they will cover her. Thanos, upon realizing what they're trying to do, throws his broken sword like a spear into the van, destroying the time machine, and with it, any hope of entering the quantum realm. The explosion from this sends a shockwave, knocking everyone down, including Captain Marvel, who has the gauntlet fly from her grasp. Iron Man, Thor, and Captain America fight to keep him from it. Thanos subdues them all in turn. Then he picks up the gauntlet and puts it on. Just before he's able to snap his fingers, Captain Marvel flies in and grabs at the gauntlet, stopping him from closing his fist. Thanos finds he cannot overpower her with strength alone, so he plucks the Power Stone from the gauntlet with his other hand, punching her with it, rendering her unconscious. A battered Tony looks over to Doctor Strange, who simply holds up one finger. This is the one moment in which they can win. Tony, with a nearly destroyed suit, charges at Thanos. Grabbing the gauntlet just as Thanos placed the Power Stone back into it, he bats Tony away, closes his fist, and looks at him, and says, "I am inevitable." With that, he snaps his fingers. Nothing happens. Thanos turns his hand, looking at the gauntlet, and sees all the stones are gone. Looking back to Tony in horror, who we see holding up his arm as the Infinity Stones start to form into position due to his nanotech suit, a power surge courses through Tony's body. He utters one of the best lines in the movie, "And I am Iron Man." He snaps his fingers, and with that, the battle is won. Thanos' forces all begin to fade to dust. Seeing this, knowing he's been beaten and his fate is sealed, simply sits down and watches all his forces are wiped from existence around him. Then, he too fades into oblivion. Sadly, the immense power of the Infinity Stones are killing him. Rhodey, then Peter, and finally Pepper arrive. With them all by his side, Peter tells him they won. Tony's AI advising life signs are critical. Pepper tells Tony he can rest now. With his never-ending goal of protecting Earth accomplished, the lights go out on his arc reactor, and he is gone. Now, I personally love this. I can't think of anyone I would rather have seen get the final word on Thanos. Tony, Iron Man, has been at the heart of the MCU from day one. His final line, being the same as it was in the first Iron Man, is poetic. In Infinity War, Tony fought with every ounce of his being, knowing better than anyone the stakes. While I didn't want to see Tony die, I'm glad he got to go out a true hero. Next, we see the various family and friends reunited. Clint returns home to his family. Peter is reunited with Ned at school. Scott spends some time with Hope and his daughter. T'Challa being back in Wakanda with his family. We hear the voice of Tony, who has left a holographic recording of himself in the event anything happened to him. It's being viewed by Pepper, his daughter, as well as a few close friends. They have a small service where Pepper places Tony's first arc reactor that she had memorialized to him as a gift into a wreath and places it on the lake by their home. Pretty much every character who knew Tony is in attendance to pay their respects to the man who gave his life to save the universe. Even the kid from Iron Man 3 shows up. We also see Nick Fury lurking in the background. Clint and Wanda talk about how both Natasha and Vision would have known they didn't give up their lives for nothing. Later, we see Thor back in New Asgard with Valkyrie. He tells her she should lead the people. He feels he needs to find a different path, and he has a ride now, the Benatar, with Rocket telling him to get a move on. What they seem to be setting up here is nothing short of awesome. On board, we see Peter searching for Gamora. After boarding the ship himself, Thor refers to them as being the Asgardians of the galaxy, together again. It takes no time for Peter, feeling his position threatened, to assert he is in charge. He is the captain. All the while, Thor humors him by agreeing, of course. I really need to see this happen now. Thor paired up with the Guardians was one of my favorite things from Infinity War, and I really hope this scene is indicative of what's to come in the next Guardians, or possibly Asgardians, movie. Meanwhile, Steve is back in a time suit, preparing to step back through the quantum realm in order to return all the Infinity Stones to their original times. Carrying Mjolnir and a special case containing the stones, Bruce is operating the new quantum tunnel they have set up outside, telling Steve when his mission is complete he will return 5 seconds after leaving, even if it takes him a while to complete his mission. Sam and Bucky see him off. Several seconds pass, Steve hasn't returned. Bucky sees something off in the distance. He and Sam walk towards the lakeside where they see an old man sitting on a bench. Bucky hangs back, telling Sam he should approach. When he does, he sees the old man is Steve. He's wearing a wedding band now. After he completed his mission, instead of coming back, he stayed in the past and lived a life with Peggy Carter. Sam is happy for him, but sad to live in a world without Captain America. At this, Steve gives him his shield, unbroken and pristine, telling Sam it's his now. Sam, reluctant at first, thanks him and tells him that he'll do his best, with Steve telling him this is why it's his now. The last thing we are shown is a scene of Steve and Peggy having that dance they always talked about. I thought this was a nice conclusion to Steve's journey and character arc. Having fought the greatest battle of his life and helping defeat Thanos, he was presented with an opportunity to get back the life he lost at the end of the first Avenger, and quite literally brought things back full circle. Now, having handed off the shield to Sam as the new Captain America. I was a little surprised at this, as I would have expected it to go to Bucky, given he's also a super soldier, though given Bucky's history, Sam is clearly the one the world would trust the more of the two. I wonder what this will look like going forward in the MCU. I gotta say though, it's a bit of a shame we didn't get to see some scenes of his mission, like seeing Captain America coming face to face with Red Skull again on Vormir, or maybe getting to see the look on Thor's face as Cap just casually hands him Mjolnir. Oh well. With that, with the Endgame over, the MCU closes out 11 years of build-up, the conclusion to 21 movies. And while not every movie has been perfect, they were all building up to this, and this was about as satisfying an ending as anything I could have imagined. It's obvious everyone involved poured their hearts and souls into making the best finale they could. I can only hope my favorite franchise gets as beautiful an end in December. Yeah, that'll probably be a whole separate video. Endgame is easily one of my top favorites of the MCU, maybe even number one. It's not perfect, but it comes pretty damn close. If I had to give it a rating, I would probably have to say 9.5 out of 10. Next up, we have Spider-Man Far From Home. And Sony, please don't screw up the MCU deal. Just let Marvel keep doing it, and keep printing you money. That's really about as win-win as you can get. My god, this video took a long time to finish. I wanted to have this up a lot sooner, but sadly life and work got in the way. I've been really determined to finish it though, so hopefully you've enjoyed it. Please let me know what you thought of both Endgame the movie and this video in the comments below. Also, I would really appreciate it if you would like and share the video as well. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel for more great gaming content and the occasional movie review. As I've always said, I really want to grow the channel, and your support can really help me do that. That's it for now though. This is Infinite Omega. I've been Black Deatha, and we've been talking Avengers Endgame. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. You have an amazing day. Goodbye.